she raised him in a cold room with no furniture. She moved him 12 times in just 3 years through the freezing winters of Akron, Ohio, carrying everything they owned in a single, battered blue suitcase. She skipped her own meals for days, just to make sure her boy had enough strength to step onto a basketball court. She never asked for a single thing in return. And then, one cold autumn afternoon, a stranger on Fifth Avenue looked at her scuffed shoes, looked at her faded cotton coat, and told her she did not belong in a room full of shiny clocks. He had absolutely no idea whose mother he had just disrespected, because her son stands 7 feet tall, is a self-made billionaire, and was about to make a phone call that would alter the course of that store forever. This is the true story of Gloria James, the woman who built a king from nothing, and the moment her son reminded the elite world that no luxury price tag on earth can ever measure a mother's worth. The autumn wind carried sharp metallic chill down Fifth Avenue, swirling dry oak leaves against the towering glass facade of the Ethelgard boutique. Inside, the world was engineered to feel completely untouched by the chaos of New York City. The air smelled faintly of expensive cedarwood, white tea, and the heavy, oiled leather of vault doors. Soft, amber spotlighting focused exclusively on the velvet-lined glass cases, where mechanical tourbillon watches ticked with a silence that sounded like money itself. Julian Sterling adjusted his silk necktie in the reflection of a polished marble pillar, his fingers moving with flawless, practiced precision. As the senior floor director, he had spent 9 years learning how to calculate a human being's net worth in less than 3 seconds. He watched the heavy brass doors swing open, expecting a hedge fund manager or a European diplomat, but instead, an older African-American woman stepped onto the plush emerald carpet. She wore a faded navy blue cotton coat, simple orthopedic walking shoes, and a knitted gray scarf that looked like it had survived a dozen winter storms. She carried no designer handbag, her hands were bare of diamonds, and she held herself with a quiet, unbothered stillness that Julian instantly mistook for poverty. Gloria James looked around the gleaming showroom, her eyes resting on a display of bespoke leather-bound travel watch cases in the corner. She had traveled all the way from her hotel just to find a specific, handcrafted leather piece she knew her son would appreciate for his constant road trips. It was a beautiful item, priced at $4,200, a sum that used to represent 6 months of rent during their hardest years in Ohio. She had saved carefully for this, wanting this specific milestone birthday gift to come directly from her own hands, independent of her son's limitless wealth. She smiled warmly at Julian as he approached, her eyes crinkling with the gentle kind of exhaustion that only a mother who has worked 3 decades on her feet could truly understand. Julian did not smile back, his gaze dropping instantly to the scuffed rubber soles of her shoes, before rising to her unvarnished fingernails. "Can I help you find something specific, ma'am? Or are you just seeking shelter from the wind?" Julian asked, his voice dripping with a cold, formal, polite sharpness that felt like a slap. "I am looking for the vintage saddle-leather timepiece briefcase. The one with the hand-stitched brass clasps," Gloria replied, her voice remaining low, steady, and entirely calm despite the temperature in the room. Julian tilted his chin slightly, stepping between Gloria and the display case as if protecting a museum artifact from a trespasser. "That particular collection is part of our private heritage archive, and the pieces begin at $4,000. So perhaps a commercial department store down the block would better suit your afternoon shopping needs." Gloria blinked, but her posture did not break, her shoulders remaining perfectly straight as she looked directly into the young man's eyes. "I know exactly how much it cost, youngs, and I would like to see the piece because I intend to purchase it this afternoon," she said quietly. Julian forced a thin, hollow smile that did not reach his eyes, his posture tightening as he glanced toward the security guard standing near the entrance. "I am afraid that will not be possible today, ma'am, because the showroom is currently reserved for clients with pre-arranged private consultations, and we must clear the floor immediately." There was no private consultation scheduled for that hour, and the heavy silence that followed his words made the lie hang in the air like smoke. Gloria stood completely still for a long, heavy moment, a faint shadow of old, familiar pain crossing her face, but she did not raise her voice, nor did she allow a single tear to fall. She simply looked at the polished name tag on his chest, nodded once with an immense quiet dignity, and turned toward the glass doors. She walked back out into the biting New York wind, her head held remarkably high, leaving the gleaming world of Ethelgard behind her. But nobody in that showroom understood what was actually written on the faded, weathered luggage tag attached to the old leather bag her son carried on every flight. The heavy brass doors of Ethelgard clicked shut, sealing the interior once again in its pristine, climate-controlled silence. Outside, the muffled roar of Manhattan traffic continued. But inside, the only sound was the rhythmic, hypnotic ticking of a grandfather clock from the late 19th century. Julian Sterling stood by the marble pillar, using a silk cloth to wipe a microscopic smudge from the glass display case where Gloria had just been standing. He took a deep breath, inhaling the rich scent of polished wood and expensive leather that always made him feel secure. For Julian, this store was not just a workplace. It was a sanctuary where the messy, unpredictable realities of the outside world could be filtered through the clean lens of extreme wealth. Every object in the boutique had been curated to project an image of absolute perfection and historical prestige. On the walnut tables sat heavy crystal ashtrays that had never seen ash, alongside leather-bound lookbooks detailing timepieces that took 7 months to assemble by hand. 2 junior associates, dressed in identical charcoal gray suits, moved silently across the room like ghosts, adjusting velvet trays and whispering in low, deferential tones. They had watched the interaction with Gloria. From a distance, their faces completely blank, trained never to interfere with a senior director's judgment. To them, Julian was the ultimate authority on who belonged in this world and who did not, an expert in protecting the store's elite atmosphere. Julian walked back to his desk, sitting down in a high-backed leather chair that creaked softly under his weight. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a ledger bound in black calfskin, listing the names of clients who spent millions annually without ever looking at a price tag. These were the people Julian respected, the individuals whose arrival required the serving of vintage champagne and the locking of the front doors for absolute privacy. He spent his days catering to their every whim, memorizing their anniversaries, and laughing at jokes that were rarely funny. In his mind, his proximity to this wealth made him part of it, separating him from the ordinary people who crowded the sidewalks of Fifth Avenue. He looked through the large window, watching the crowds of tourists and office workers rushing past the storefront like a blur of gray and black coats. Julian felt a deep sense of superiority, believing that his sharp suit and his position at Ethelgard defined his true worth as a man. He thought about the older woman who had just left, convinced that he had done his job perfectly by protecting the boutique from someone who simply did not fit the brand. He could not comprehend that true value had nothing to do with the label on a coat or the price of a watch. He remained entirely trapped in his world of polished surfaces, unaware that a massive storm was already brewing just outside his immaculate glass walls. Gloria James walked slowly down the crowded sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, the cold wind brushing against her face as she looked at the heavy gray sky. The sharp rejection inside the boutique did not anger her, but it pulled her mind backward through time, traveling hundreds of miles away to a very different life. She remembered the winters in Akron, Ohio, where the cold did not just stay outside, but crept through the thin wooden cracks of small, rented rooms. She remembered the constant, heavy weight of uncertainty, wondering if the next month would bring another eviction notice or another cold night without heat. In those dark years, Gloria was just a teenager herself, facing a world that looked at her with the exact same cold judgment she had just seen in Julian's eyes. She had no money, no security, and no wealth, but she had a baby boy with deep, observant eyes who depended on her for everything. When the world became too loud and the pressures of poverty threatened to break her apart, she would look at young LeBron and find a quiet, unbreakable strength inside her spirit. They did not have furniture, and they did not have luxury, but they had a single battered blue suitcase that held everything they owned in the world. That old suitcase was their only anchor as they moved 12 times in a span of just 3 years, carrying their lives from one small apartment to another in the dead of winter. Gloria would pack their few clothes, LeBron's single basketball, and a blanket, lifting the heavy handle with bleeding, blistered hands while keeping her head held high. On the nights when there was nothing to eat but a small bowl of white rice, she would sit with LeBron on the floor and tell him stories about a brighter future. She would look into his eyes and whisper wise words that would become the foundation of his entire existence, telling him that his spirit was far bigger than the broken walls around them. LeBron never forgot the sight of his mother's small hands lifting that heavy suitcase, nor did he forget the fierce, protective love that kept them safe in the dark. He carried those words and that memory through every hardship, using her sacrifice as the fuel to build an empire and become a king on the court. Now, as Gloria watched the wealthy shoppers rush past her into the high-end stores of New York, she smiled a soft, knowing smile. She knew that no shiny watch or expensive leather case could ever match the priceless value of the survival they had shared. Julian Sterling did not look up immediately. When Gloria turned back toward the display cases, his fingers continuing to browse through the black ledger on his desk. He could hear the quiet, rhythmic clicking of her walking shoes against the marble edge of the carpet, a sound that felt like a disruption to his orderly world. He looked up, his brow furrowing, as he realized the older woman had not left the boutique as he had commanded. Instead, she had stopped near a display of handcrafted leather watch rolls, her fingers lightly hovering over the gold clasps without touching them. Julian felt a sudden surge of heat rise to his collar, his professional patience entirely evaporating under the weight of his own arrogance. He stood up from his leather chair, the legs scraping loudly against the floor and drawing the attention of a wealthy couple shopping nearby. Julian walked across the room with long, aggressive strides, his hands balling into fists behind his back as he approached Gloria once again. "Ma'am, I believe I made myself completely clear just a moment ago when I asked you to find another establishment," Julian said, his voice rising enough to echo off the high ceilings. "We are expecting a very important collector within the minute, and your presence on the showroom floor is creating an unnecessary distraction for our active clientele." The wealthy couple near the diamond bezels stopped talking, the husband lowering his eyeglasses mid-sip from a glass of sparkling water, while his wife exchanged an uncomfortable glance with a junior associate. A heavy, suffocating awkwardness filled the boutique as every eye turned toward the small woman in the faded cotton coat. Julian stood over her, his chest puffed out in his slim black suit, using his height to intimidate her into submission. He expected her to apologize, to look down in shame, or to hurry out of the glass doors like a criminal caught in the act. But Gloria did not flinch, nor did she lower her gaze under the intense pressure of the public humiliation. She slowly turned her body to face him, her shoulders dropping into a relaxed, unbothered posture that seemed to drain all the power from Julian's aggressive stance. She looked at him with an immense, quiet pity, a look that told him she had survived things far more terrifying than a young man in an expensive suit. "I hear you perfectly well, Julian, and I see exactly what you are doing in this room today," Gloria said, her voice remaining as soft and steady as a heartbeat. "You think these glass cases and these shiny labels make you better than the people who walk through that door, but they just show how small you really are." She turned around with a slow, regal grace, walking toward the exit with her head held remarkably high, leaving Julian standing alone in a room full of silent, judging eyes. Gloria James sat on a concrete bench in Central Park, the cool afternoon sun filtering through the bare tree branches as she pulled her navy blue coat tightly around her shoulders. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, her fingers slightly stiff from the autumn chill. As she stared at the screen for a long moment, she hesitated, not wanting to bring the cold negativity of her afternoon into her son's busy world, but she knew he would catch the slight shift in her energy anyway. She pressed the speed dial, and the phone barely completed its first ring before a deep, familiar voice filled the line, radiating warmth and instant focus. "Hey, Mama, what's going on in New York today?" LeBron asked, his voice carrying the faint, ambient sound of a quiet meeting room in his Los Angeles headquarters. Gloria took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing a gentle laugh that she had practiced for years to hide her exhaustion from her children. "Nothing major, baby. I just had a little situation at a boutique on Fifth Avenue while looking for your birthday present. It is really nothing at all," she said softly. But LeBron had spent his entire life studying the exact rhythms of his mother's voice, knowing every hidden sigh and every forced smile she used to protect him. The light, casual tone of her laugh did not fool him. It was the exact same laugh she used when the electricity went out in Akron, and she told him they were just playing a game of candlelight safari. LeBron sat up straight in his executive chair, his jaw tightening as a heavy, cold stillness washed over his entire frame. "Mama, do not look at the floor and do not minimize it. Just tell me exactly what happened in that room," LeBron said, his voice dropping into a low, commanding register that signaled absolute attention. Gloria sighed, knowing there was no hiding the truth from her firstborn, and she calmly detailed her interaction with Julian Sterling at the Ethelgard boutique. She described the cold look in his eyes, the judgment of her plain walking shoes, and the humiliating way he used a fake appointment to sweep her off the showroom floor. LeBron listened without interrupting a single time, his massive hand gripping the armrest of his chair so tightly that the leather groaned under the immense pressure. He felt a fierce, protective fire ignite deep within his chest, remembering the promise he made to her when he was just a boy carrying that single blue suitcase through the snow. LeBron did not shout, nor did he let anger cloud his strategic mind, knowing that a king does not win a battle with loud noises but with flawless execution. "I need you to do me a small favor, Mama. I want you to clear your schedule for this coming Tuesday morning," he said, his voice entirely smooth and unshakable. "Why, LeBron, what are you planning to do down there?" Gloria asked, a faint note of worry creeping into her eyes. "Just trust me, Mama. Put on your favorite dress and meet me in the hotel lobby at exactly 10 o'clock, he replied with a soft, reassuring smile. LeBron hung up the phone and stared out his office window at the California horizon, his mind already spinning a web of consequences that would shake the very foundation of that arrogant boutique on Fifth Avenue. Tuesday morning arrived with a clear, piercing blue sky over Manhattan, the glass skyscrapers reflecting the sharp autumn sunlight like giant mirrors. Julian Sterling stood behind the main counter at Ethelgard, his hands smoothing down the edges of a fresh velvet tray containing 3 new platinum chronographs. The boutique was entirely quiet, the air humming with its usual expensive stillness, and Julian felt a deep sense of calm satisfaction as he checked his gold watch. He looked toward the entrance, Just as the heavy brass doors were swung open by the security guard, who suddenly froze in place, his jaw dropping as he forgot to salute. A massive shadow fell across the emerald carpet, blotting out the sunlight from Fifth Avenue as the largest human being Julian had ever seen in person stepped into the showroom. It was LeBron James, wearing a flawlessly tailored charcoal gray wool suit that accentuated his towering 7-foot frame, his polished leather dress shoes making no sound against the plush floor. He carried himself with an immense, quiet authority that immediately shifted the entire atmospheric pressure of the room, drawing the frozen stares of every single associate in the boutique. But it was not the legendary athlete who made Julian's heart skip a beat. It was the woman walking gracefully beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. Gloria James walked into the boutique wearing a beautiful, elegant, cream-colored dress, her gray hair styled neatly, and her eyes looking directly ahead with a serene, unbothered dignity. Julian's face turned an immediate ghostly white as his eyes darted from the mother to the son, the realization of his catastrophic mistake hitting him like a physical blow. His hands began to tremble behind the glass counter, his mind racing through the events of the previous Saturday, remembering the cold words he had used to sweep this exact woman off his floor. He opened his mouth to speak, to stammer out a frantic apology, but his throat felt very dry as LeBron closed the distance between them, standing over the counter like an unshakable mountain. LeBron looked down at Julian, his deep, expressive eyes filled with a calm, freezing stillness that contained no loud anger but demanded absolute submission. "My mother wants to go shopping," LeBron said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant register that vibrated through the high plaster ceilings of the showroom. Julian's knees felt weak under the intense weight of the gaze, his polished professional mask completely shattering as he looked at the man who could buy the entire boutique with a single phone call. "Yes, Mr. James. Of course, please let me assist you with anything you desire," Julian whispered, his hands shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of the marble counter to keep his balance. The transaction machine clicked, producing a tiny white receipt for $37,400 that Julian Sterling handed over with a hand that would not stop shaking. LeBron James gathered the heavy leather bags himself, refusing to let the junior associates touch them, his large hand gently guiding his mother toward the exit. He stopped just before the brass doors, turning his head slightly to look back at Julian one last time with that same piercing, quiet intensity. "I am not going to ask for your manager, and I am not going to call the corporate office to demand your job," LeBron said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying softness. "My mother already gave you the only punishment that mattered today, because she allowed you to see exactly what a real queen looks like, and you will have to live with that memory every time you look in a mirror." Within less than 2 hours, after the black SUV pulled away from Fifth Avenue, the district president of Ethelgard arrived at the boutique without any prior warning. He walked straight into the private office, his face tight with an anger that required no loud shouting to be felt by everyone on the showroom floor. A wealthy collector who had been standing near the sunglasses display during the confrontation had already leaked the entire interaction to a major sports media outlet. By noon, the reputation that Ethelgard had spent 40 years building as an exclusive, inclusive heritage house was being torn apart in the comment sections of every social platform. Julian sat in his high-backed leather chair, his desk cleared of his black calfskin ledger, staring at the white termination papers placed directly in front of him. "You did not just disrespect a woman in a cotton coat, Julian. You violated the basic human decency that this house stands for," the president said, his voice flat and completely devoid of sympathy. "Your arrogance has cost this boutique its integrity, and no amount of high-end sales can ever repair the damage you did to that mother's name this morning." Julian packed his personal belongings into a plain cardboard box, his fingers touching the silk tie he had adjusted so proudly just 3 days earlier. He walked out of the heavy brass doors of Ethelgard not as a senior floor director, but as a man who had been completely stripped of his artificial identity. He stood on the concrete sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, the cold wind blowing dust against polished shoes, realizing that without the shiny walls of the boutique, he felt entirely invisible. 6 months passed, and the bitter autumn chill of Manhattan gave way to the soft, warm breath of early spring, melting the stubborn ice along the edges of Central Park. Inside the headquarters of the Vance Legacy Foundation, LeBron James sat at his wooden desk, reviewing the final list of the first 100 recipients for the newly established Gloria James Resilience Scholarship. He had not used his immense wealth to destroy or to seek petty revenge against the boutique, but instead, he used the moment to build an unshakable monument to his mother's survival. The scholarship provided full financial support and housing for the children of single mothers who were working multiple shifts, immigrant mothers, and women who had been told by the world that they did not belong. Each acceptance letter was sent out in a deep red box containing a small gold pin shaped like an old, battered suitcase, a quiet symbol that where you begin does not define where you are going. The campaign swept across the internet like wildfire. A simple video of LeBron placing the very first scholarship pin onto his mother's dress, accumulating over 90 million views within a single week. Millions of people who had ever felt the cold sting of social judgment shared their own stories under the viral message, transforming a moment of public humiliation into a global celebration of maternal sacrifice. Meanwhile, far away from the flashing cameras and the luxury storefronts of Fifth Avenue, Julian Sterling sat in a cramped, sunlit kitchen in a small trailer park outside Bakersfield, California. He wore a simple cotton t-shirt, his hair unslicked, his hands bare of any expensive gold watches, as he watched the steam rise from a pot of black coffee. He had spent the last 5 months working at a local logistics warehouse, lifting heavy crates for 12 hours a day, an experience that had completely broken his old artificial pride and forced him to face the reality of hard, honest labor. He pulled a sheet of plain-lined notebook paper toward him, his fingers steady as he picked up a blue ballpoint pen to write a letter he had carried in his heart for months. "Dear Mr. James and Miss Gloria," he wrote, his handwriting small and entirely devoid of his former corporate elegance. "When I looked at Miss Gloria inside that boutique last autumn, I did not just see an older woman in a faded navy coat. I saw my own mother, a woman who cleaned office buildings at night to send me to fashion school. I was so deeply ashamed of where I came from, so terrified of the poverty of my childhood, that I pushed her away by projecting my own self-hatred onto your mother. Your whispered words did not break me, Mr. James. They saved me from becoming a monster of my own making, and that very night, I called my mother for the first time in 2 years just to tell her I loved her." At the bottom of the page, Julian enclosed a small photograph of himself and his mother standing outside a local laundromat, both of them smiling warmly under the California sun. The soft, golden twilight of a California evening filtered through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of LeBron's private study, casting long, peaceful shadows across the polished hardwood floor. On a low walnut table in the center of the room sat the ancient, battered blue suitcase from Akron, its faded fabric and scuffed edges remaining completely untouched by time. A stark contrast to the gleaming championship trophies lining the surrounding shelves. Gloria James stood by the window, her fingers gently tracing the worn leather handle of the old suitcase before she turned to look at her son, who was sitting quietly on the leather sofa with a look of profound peace in his eyes. He did not say a word, nor did he need to. because the silence between was filled with the unspoken weight of 1,000 shared sacrifices that no amount of wealth or fame could ever diminish. Gloria reached into her pocket and pulled out the small gold pin from the foundation, the tiny replica of their old suitcase, catching the warm evening light as she placed it carefully on top of the blue fabric. She looked back at LeBron, a soft, beautiful smile crinkling the corners of her eyes as she saw the boy who had once promised her a better life while sitting on a cold apartment floor in Ohio. The world outside would always remember him as a king on the basketball court, a billionaire businessman, and a global icon. But in this quiet room, he was simply her son, the boy who never forgot the hands that built his foundation. LeBron stood up, his massive frame moving with a slow, gentle grace as he walked over to his mother, wrapping his large arms around her shoulders and burying his face in her gray hair. "Walk like you have somewhere to go, Mama," he whispered into the quiet room, his voice dropping to a soft, emotional fragment that hung in the air long after the evening shadows swallowed the light.